Good morning, everybody. I hope that you are well. Before I start, let me just check if everybody is back. If so, just give me a thumbs up. I'm just waiting for a few more thumbs. Okay, so welcome everybody. Welcome to today's lesson where we will be looking at assessment report writing. And so at the end of this session, you should be able to demonstrate your understanding for the purpose of a diagnostic scholastic report. You should be able to compile a report according to the suggested format, um, analyze and integrate the results of the scholastic assessments that you have done throughout the year, write a report based on the scholastic assessment, as well as provide parental feedback based on the assessment which you have written. And so before we jump into the content itself, I do want to do a bit of housekeeping. Um, I have sent out a notice with Courtney that I will be extending the submission of the assignment 4, and that was to mitigate the requests. Those who have submitted their assignment 4, please note that perhaps if you would like to tweak or perhaps still work on it after today's session because something inspired you in the lecture, you are more than welcome to drop me an email and I will reopen the portal so that you can then resubmit. The extended submission date is the 30th of August 2024. Just before I carry on, I just want to find out if there are perhaps any questions in relation to what I've just shared. If you do have any questions, you can put your hands up or you can unmute yourself and ask the question. If we're all on board, then we can proceed. Okay, so I wanted to start off our conversation today in regards to assess the report writing by looking at the holistic approach to report writing. And when I say holistic report, that means viewing the child holistically, obviously being informed by the Bron Brenner lens that we are quite familiar with, but also informed by the factors that might have that might have shown up in the interviews, in the observations, as you were assessing the learner. And so that is just to conscientize you on the different domains that should be part and parcel of your thinking process when compiling your report. And that is obviously the learner's personality, the environment from which the learner comes from, as well as the system and the realities of perhaps factors that might be impacting the system. You also need to be cognizant of the peak times of the learner, right? Because you've been assessing the learner, and throughout your assessment, you've been observing the learner, and therefore, you should have become cognizant about patterns in terms of the learner's functionality. When the learner is, most attentive, and the when the learner is less attentive, as well as the learning style, through the administration of your assessment, picking up on perhaps certain learning styles that resonate with the learner, and perhaps other styles that might have challenged the learner, as well as all the multiple intelligence that the learner might have showcased throughout the assessment process. And so being cognizant of these domains give a holistic picture of who the child is in terms of the report that you will be writing up. And the reason for a holistic approach to report writing is because report writing is more than just identifying perhaps the challenges that might be hindering the child's learning experiences, but by also highlighting the strengths of the learner, because that in itself, as I shared before, really feeds into the child's self-concept, or how the child sees him or herself. And that obviously finds root in how motivated the learner is at the end of the day when it comes to learning. And motivation plays a key role when it comes to the opportunities of developing and learning and being open to those experiences. And so when we consider the environment as well as the systemic reality of the learners, we need to be cognizant of what is happening contextually, but also what is happening beyond the community of the particular learner that might be impacting the learner's reality. And so we are aware of the environmental and the systemic realities that are affecting many communities and many families within the South African context. And so I urge you to be aware of that, if that is one of the factors that came through to the interviews that you had with the system as well as the child, but also using your observation and triangulating it into your report, so that it gives an understanding of who the child is and where the child comes from and what the factors are that might be impacting the child socially, which in turn can hinder the child's ability to really show up in a learning environment, so that they can benefit from the space that they find themselves in. And so when we look at the challenging South African realities, we keep in mind as well the high levels of governmental corruption and increasing dissatisfaction among the general population. And we can see how that is sometimes played out in certain school contexts, who are frustrated because of a lack of resources, therefore feeling that they are not equipped to perhaps meet a particular child's need, as well as keeping in mind the history that is part and parcel of the South African story. That is still very much a reality in which many people or many communities economically as well as socially live in. And then we are cognizant about the struggling education system that is being impacted by all of it, and how that just ripples down to how the child might be experiencing the school space within the 21st century. We're also cognizant about the unemployment of up to 60%. And I mean that the numbers quite recently have shown that that has actually increased. And we are cognizant of how that impacts certain households and what that could mean in terms of how families will need to recreate themselves in order to survive. And then also the unacceptable high levels of crime and violence related to increasing poverty because of people, because of people because of people wanting to survive. Nobody really wants to enter into a space of crime, but I'm also not making an excuse that that is a reason why crime is part and parcel of the human experience. But there are many factors that could contribute to why crime and violence is part and parcel of the human experience. And there are a lot of research out there that speaks about multiple factors that actually contribute, and many of them points to poverty being one of those factors. And then we have limited service delivery to poor communities, medical services, sanitation, education, and mental health services. And then strike action and community mobilization. In each community, there will be outbursts of strike action because of dissatisfaction, but there is also the language which the communities have been taught to use in order to feel heard. And so those actions still is very much part of the reality of what is happening. But more than that, it is telling us about where we are in terms of the progress that we should have made, and perhaps a call to reflection as to what it is that we need to attend to in order to really bring to life the Constitution, as well as the legislation and the acts that has been so beautifully written, so that the gap between the poor and the wealthy can be breached. We can never close it, but we can build bridges. And so South African teachers are not sufficiently equipped to deal with the poverty-related psychosocial challenges they encounter among learners in their classrooms, because there's also a lot of balls that they are juggling in their functioning as a teacher. But a lot of the teachers that are currently, a lot of the perhaps older teachers that are in the field of work, a lot of their modules did not cover, certain factors and certain aspects that has become part of the reality of how school is being experienced. And that in itself, brings about teachers feeling that they are not equipped, And there's a lot of research out there that shows that because of the gap, the academic gaps that exists, but because of the fact that teachers perhaps don't keep up with their continuous education or training, that a lot of them don't have the skills to deal with the many issues that they do find within their classroom and their spaces. And there are little psychosocial support available as well, especially in townships and in slums and in rural contexts. There's a research that has shown that there's one educational psychologist to 186,000 learners in the Thabo Mofokeng district in the Eastern Free State. And then NW, Franschhoek School project, there was like there's 30 schools and to one a part-time psychologist and one full-time school counselor. And we can see by these numbers, all the lack of the available numbers of certain statistics about the gap that exists in context in terms of the support that should be available, but is not available in a lot of contexts. So the onus thus falls on, on teachers to really provide support. However, these teachers are not prepared to hold all of these needs within the space, because they themselves might not be equipped to do so. And this is just, again, conscientizing you as students who are part of this course and who have done this course for this year about the importance of what you are really doing, because you are filling a need, not just a gap, but a need. And again, this is what is needed. And so really take into heart the importance of what you are currently busy with, and the case child that you have been engaging with for this year. It wasn't just a learning experience and a development of skills, but it was both of that, informed by the need that I've just shared with you, and that is the gap that exists, which through participation of this course, you will be able to fill in the context in which you find yourself. And what are some of the other barriers to learning? Just to, again, recall on your prior knowledge that we need to really consider. And that is, barriers that can affect that can influence why the child is perhaps struggling in certain areas. And so we need to keep in mind all of the documentations that we have collected. And so in me sharing this with you, I'm taking you back to perhaps your interviews that you had with the child's caretaker or the parents. And so looking at factors that could influence development, such as perhaps alcohol consumption during pregnancy and insufficient nutrition for perhaps brain development, neurodevelopmental disorders, again, recalling what you have learned in the previous module that needs to be kept in mind about the different types of neurodevelopmental disorders and perhaps the criteria that you guys have been going through, and keeping that in mind as well. Sensory motor challenges is perhaps illness like epilepsy, diabetes, ADHD that was reported, inconsistent discipline, whether it is at school or whether it is at home, and looking at how the parenting style of the parent or the guardian, is it the authoritarian parenting style, and then also looking at whether the parenting style is permissive or negligent, and also perhaps being conscious about a child's excessive exposure to technology. And so keeping in mind all of the conversations that you might have had, and really looking at what was shared with you, which will contribute towards your discussion in the report which you are writing. And so when we keep all of that in mind, we need to also be conscious that your report is your face to the public, and what it contains really says a lot about how you approach a case, but also how you put the information together in order to give a holistic picture of who the child actually is, and therefore individualizing your report in a way that shows the uniqueness of the case child that you have been working with. And in so doing, what you should not forget is that the main purpose of the assessment report is to address and to answer the referral question. And so you keep that at the top of your head when compiling your report. I also need to caution you that do not use too many different heading levels. 3 levels should be sufficient, but I also urge you to be creative, because report writing is a creative process, and no one report will look like the other report, as long as there is a sequence that really paints a picture from beginning to end, and which basically answers the main purpose of the assessment and reason for referral. And then we also need to really be conscious about inconsistent formatting that will make your report difficult to read if it doesn't follow a particular sequence, because you will need to paint a holistic picture of where it started, what happened, and show what are the outcomes of the processes or the stages or the phases that you have navigated with your case child. And so we need to be conscious about just these things, because it in our creativity, there still need to be structure. So what should your report look like, and what should it include? While your report will, first of all, will identify the reason for referral. And so that will just inform the reader what it was that prompted you to take on the case, and how the case basically landed on your table, just informing the reader thereof. And thereafter, you go into the background information of the case child, where you start elaborating on who the case child is and providing a bit of background information using Bron von Brenner's framework, just again to allow the reader to know who the child is, the case child is that you have worked with. Thereafter, you can then go into your assessment, and part of your assessment will include your observation. That is your own observation that has taken place over the course of the process. That would be the teacher's observation, as well as the parent's observation and or the caregiver's observation, which you will put together in a way that gives an understanding of who this child or case child is, in terms of how others might view them, including yourself. And it is important that you try and find a golden thread, perhaps, in the observation, and you triangulate your observations. You triangulate your observations so that it speaks the same language. And so that it brings about a theme about who this particular child is. And then we have, no, you do not need to attach your proof. You do not need to attach the observation notes and all of that. You do not need to attach it with your report. That is not required. Your report in itself is sufficient. And then you also have your informal assessments, and that is obviously the peripheral activities that the learner engaged in, that you perhaps collected from the teachers, and so you include it into and you triangulate it. I advise that you be creative, perhaps here. You are more than welcome to use tables in order to perhaps plot the information. And again, I invite you to be creative, but not at the risk of perhaps losing telling the story of who the child is. But use your creativity as to how you can incorporate the peripheral activities of the learner here. And then you have your formal assessment, and your formal assessments are the assessments that you have conducted and that you've received through this course. This is where you will now triangulate your information and your findings of the assessments that you have done. And then you have your interviews. These are the interviews that you've had. Here you triangulate the interviews and you include significant information, not just any information, but significant information that actually contributes to understanding who the child is. You are more than welcome to perhaps quote certain statements made by the participants who you have interviewed. Only if the quote that you are using or the direct quote that you are using from the interview adds value to the conversation that you are having, or is giving emphasis to what you really want, to really highlight in the report. And so you are more than welcome to do that. Again, each report will be very different because each case child is different, and their uniqueness need to be showcased in the report. And then you then go on into your discussion of the assessment results, as well as your clinical impression. Now, clinical impression refers to your particular observation within the or during the period of the assessment, the assessment itself. That is significant because, again, you are triangulating observations from different settings to describe who the case child is. And because learning is a behavior, our observation does not stop. And because emotions are part of the learning process, our observations don't stop. And so this is where we triangulate and we link behavior and emotion in our conversation when we then speak about the results of the assessments conducted. That then will then lead you towards having a conversation and concluding the conversation, where you just basically summarize your findings by highlighting the important themes that have resonated throughout stage 4 and stage 5 of your report writing. And so you just basically highlight the theme and you give recommendation, because your themes will influence the type of recommendations that you will be making. Thereafter, you then conclude your report with your signature as well as your contact details, so that parents can always perhaps reach out to you if they have further queries, or sometimes, like I said, because this is your face, by virtue of referral, by them having your contact details, they will be able to refer whoever they're having a conversation with and whoever is in need of support, like the support that you have offered to you. So I've already mentioned that it is in our summary and recommendation where we start linking the scholastic academic achievements, as well as the behavior, the decision-making, and the emotions. And so those are our clinical observations or the clinical impressions that we then include. And so we really incorporate into that space every single thing, what you've observed biologically, in terms of the child's scholastic achievements, the behavior, personality, the decision-making or the cognitive functioning of the learner, or the emotional. All of that is linked within the summary, as well as your recommendations. And so it is very important that we really triangulate the information from beginning to the end of our report. And so what is important and what I've emphasized in Unit 1 was your observation throughout the entire process. And so this, your observation plays a key role of how you will be triangulating all of this information. And so when you observed, you did not observe blindly, but you kept notes, but you also intentionally kept a mental status about the child's functioning. And so you make use of your the mental status that you've kept for each assessment. You make use of that information alongside the process notes that you have kept, and you look at the interviews, you interrogate the interviews, you look at what you have written down, and you try and find themes that aligns with each other, or you try and find information that contributes and speaks into each other. You then make use of the normed assessments and the non-normed assessments as well. And then you start writing your report in relation to the reason for referral. And you always keep that in mind. And your report in itself is a triangulation of all of the information that you have gathered. So a report on assessment according to assessment or integration of the domains. And I've included in here a table just to show you how you can perhaps divide the domains in order to help you identify a specific theme. And I will speak about that when I get to the table, which I have included. The recommendation should also be contextually relevant. And that is important. Again, I remind you that each case child that you are working with, or that you are working with, they come from different contexts. And so familiarizing yourself with what is available in the context is crucial, because that will inform how you will make recommendation, because one also needs to think about accessibility of perhaps the spaces in which you want to refer the learners to. And then also identifying themes from the domains. If divergent, contradictory, then investigate further, right? Never based on just one assessment only. That is very important. And then clinical observations based on your mental status exam. And it's not by your own impression or your interpretation, like I've said. I see there's a hand up. Let me quickly go to the chats where I can see it. Tammy?
Hi, Deon. I just wanted to check in about where you say it's not just based on one test, because from maybe my perspective, I'm understanding something incorrectly, but we've kind of been given a certain selection of scholastic assessments so they don't clash if the student needs to be further assessed. So with our scholastic assessment, it's kind of like we have this opportunity to assess the student once with the battery that we've been given, and we cannot reassess them on the same battery, or else the student has a predictability to the answers. I understand that we need to do this in triangulation with the other kind of schoolwork assessment, in class observations. Am I misunderstanding about the testing?
You are correct in your thinking. If I just have to unpack it, I would say that what I meant by that, or what is meant by this, is that you triangulate it with the peripheral activities of the learner. So that is the activities, the curriculum activities. And so you always just check against that.
Okay, thank you for the clarity.
No problem. Sue, your hand is up.
Yes, good morning, everybody. So as Tammy was saying, that yes, we've assessed the child once. One, we don't teach the child. So the only other information we have is in conversation or interviewing the class teachers. So that triangulation would be based on hearsay. The other thing is,
Sue, can I ask that did you request any activities from the teacher apart from the conversation?
no, I do not have samples of the child's work at all. And yeah, the other thing is looking at an example showed by our tutor, and also looking at real examples of educational psychologists reports who use norm-based tests. And in our reports we have got norm-based tests. They do show the result as in the score. I'm a little bit confused as why we shouldn't show the score, because I think that it's important to explain that, and now I'm making up numbers, that John read X words per minute, which indicates his reading rate is whatever. The norm for his age would be so many words per minute. I think that visceral representation of the norm and the child's score is quite important for anybody, be it the parent or somebody else, to see the deficit that the child is representing or presenting as during this assessment. By putting it in gentle words, I think might obfuscate the reality.
That is, I understand and I agree with you. Hence, I said that the report in itself will be a creative process in terms of how you put it together without obscuring the information or the importance to the reason for referral. And so if you are going to be including the scores, you are more than welcome to do that. Some people include it in the report, some people include it as an appendix. But it is always good to have a visual representation of it, because a lot of parents might not understand what you are talking about.
Yes, agreed. So one would include
Yes.
a short narrative of, so let's say, for instance, the 1 minute maths. The
Exactly.
purpose of the 1 minute maths is to, and in 2 sentences it's explained, John completed this test, blah, 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 and you give a 3 or 4 sentence verbal explanation of it, which is in positive terms. You know, he was keen to do it, he did it well, blah blah blah, and then a short table of,
Yes.
this is his score, this is the norm, and so on. So I think that one covers then that triangulation, I think, is what you're looking at.
And thereafter, I would actually advise that you then say that this is the finding.
Yes, so you're saying it is recommended that John receive whatever intervention based on, you know.
So that is where your recommendations will come in, right? when you then conclude your report. That is correct. Sarah?
Good morning, Prof. I just want to clarify the do not cite scores of tests for teacher or parent, but do make available to other medical professionals. When we had our tutor session, and I may have misinterpreted it, but I believe Courtney told us to give as much detail as possible on the findings of each assessment, and that includes putting in their score. Like for example, with the fluency, if they got 180 words per minute, let's say, and so on. So I'm just a bit confused with that saying, do not cite scores of tests. Yeah, if we could just find out exactly what we need to do. Thank you.
Well, those are the raw scores. Those are the raw scores and the tests that you've conducted. So they don't have access to that because you will be giving the report. And everything that you've done will be contained in the report.
Okay, so what that's saying is
that is the test that you have conducted. All of your tests that you have conducted.
Okay.
The raw tests. This is not the report. Do not cite scores of tests for teachers or parents. That refers to the assessments themselves.
Okay, so that means that we don't give them access to the assessments themselves, but we can give them the score of the tests.
Because that will be in the report.
Okay, thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yes, so don't give them the tests, but they can have the score on the report.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you so much.
So is there any questions in regards to, going back to the triangulation? Let me just see. Anybody's hand up? Oh, and so just one thing that I want to mention here is that do not generalize, right? It is important that you be clear and you be concise, right? And try and not use ambiguous language. Try and be as specific as you can. Try and unpack matters that needs elaboration that you believe perhaps the parent will not understand, so that it brings clarity as to what you are making reference to. And so just be cognizant of that as well. And then in terms of assessment feedback, that happens before you actually sign off your report, people, because you will find that a lot of other information that might contribute towards making certain findings much more clearer or crystallizing certain findings, that only comes up when you then give feedback to parents. And what I have found that, a lot of the times when I give feedback to parents, that there's a lot of other stuff that suddenly comes up that I need to take note of, or, that I need to note that is actually important for the report, and that really just informs perhaps the recommendation even further. And so I would normally give feedback, but I will not give the report. If there's information that comes up, I will take notes as feedback is given, and then I would incorporate the feedback into the report itself. but only if the information that has been shared during the feedback process is of significance and was not mentioned prior. Yes, Brennan? Brennan, your hand is up. Brennan? Okay, Brennan has put his hand down. Is it all clear? Does anybody have questions regarding that? This in itself will really just set your report apart and will really just strengthen your report. So what to explore during report writing as you go through the information that you have gathered, right? Look at factual knowledge, look at learned abilities, look at problem solving, look at memory, look at attention, look at future learning and academic success, right? Because if you're looking at the academic, the assessments that you've done, how the learner has performed in the different assessments. And so we need to allow that to translate into the fact that it shows that perhaps a learner is better at doing one thing over the other, so that that can inform the type of recommendation that you will be making or give emphasis to the recommendation. You should also highlight these qualities as well, the true innate ability and the absolute learning potential of the learner that should be, present, or that should be highlighted in your report. Motivation, curiosity, creativity, drive or determination, the study skills of the learner, as well as the achievement in academic subjects, given that you will be looking through the curriculum activities that you have collected for the learner, if you have done so. Brennan, yes?
Sorry, my microphone wasn't working, so I just
No
had to
problem.
that.
Never too late. What is your question?
I'm just a little bit concerned, and I hope this makes sense. So we sought out our learner. We had to go looking for our learner, a learner that had potential barriers to learning.
You went looking for the school, right?
For the school who ultimately gave us a learner who
Yes.
was potentially experiencing barriers to learning.
So the referral for the reason why the school referred the learner was
Because she was struggling with her comprehension and her reading.
okay.
However, now that I've found that she has a very poor reading fluency, she's in grade 5, but her reading speed is below level grade 1. And I found, problems with her phonemic and phonological awareness, and I'm just concerned as to how to tell her parent who can't afford the external help I'm recommending where to go. I hope that makes sense. I feel
That
like
does make sense, yes.
I feel a little bit guilty in a way, as if I found these things and now I'm like, oh, here are recommendations that I know you can't afford, but the government can't necessarily help you with either. So here's just a report.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, hence the conversation prior about being cognizant of resources available to the case child, as well as the system. from which the case child is coming from, being cognizant of the resources that are available that would influence the recommendation, because your recommendation, what can be done is you can break down your recommendation to perhaps that which you believe can be done and achieved, to perhaps the more complex things that need resources that you are aware of is not currently available to the learner. Because remember, your function after the report is case management.
Yes.
So for me, in order, because I hear what you're saying, in order to not make them despondent, is by starting off your recommendation with that which you know is available, can be achieved, can be done, to the much more complex ones, so that arrangements and conversations perhaps with stakeholders can be had to put things in place. But while things are put in place, part of the first recommendations are perhaps attended to. In that way, I don't think that that the report in itself will bring about doom and gloom, but possible pathways that can be explored in order to help the case child.
Okay. I feel
I hear what you're saying, but if I want to invite you as well to perhaps drop me an email, and I will set up a Teams with you. I will go through your report, and let us see what we can do. When the report has been written and you've received your mark, but we need to bring the recommendations to life, I am available. Drop me an email. Let us be creative. Let us put heads together and see what we can do. Give me a little bit more contextual information, and let us see what we can do.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Have a good day.
Same to you. Thank you so much for sharing that, Brandon. Much appreciated. Okay, and so just possible recommendations for self, for parents and teachers, right? Again, I just have a few minutes, but I just want to mention that we honestly, really, when engaging with our case child, view our case child from a multiple intellectual perspective. And so I want to encourage you, if you haven't read on a multiple intellectual perspective, to go and do so, and allow what Gardner is sharing there to perhaps inform how you will be constructing your sentences when elaborating on your findings. And so you will, if you go through Gardner, you will see that there's different types of multiple intellectuals. Please go and consult it and see what is relevant, or which intellectual application applies to your student or your case learner at best, and incorporate that into your report. And then what could help a child become successful in life is obviously not highlighting just the challenges, but like I've always said, you're identifying the strengths, amplifying the strengths, because nobody really feels good when all you tell them is what is wrong with me. And so be conscious about the fact that perhaps later on the child, if they are not able now, later on the child might engage with the report that you are writing, and ask yourself, what is it that you would want resonating with the child if the child has an opportunity to engage with the report that you are producing. And so for me, it is important that part of your report objective is to really pour back into the child's self-esteem, right? And you can do so just by really amplifying the strengths and highlighting those areas in which the child is currently flourishing, as well as identifying stability and purpose and routine, and perhaps making use of that in your recommendation, so that can be nurtured, in the hope that that will allow the different pathways that need stimulation to be lit up. And so I spoke about the integration of all of your assessments and what you have done. And so I've been exposed in my own learning to this table, which is the domains of function, for the domains of functioning. And perhaps you can do the same, just drawing up a table in this manner where you have all of the domains that you have been assessing and have been part of the process, and identifying both the strengths and the challenges, and therefore identifying perhaps the themes. And by doing so, you will be able to identify the themes much quicker, much easier, tell the story in a way that is fair and does do justice to who the child is. And so this brings me to the end of my lecture. I do invite you to reach out to me if you have any concerns. Please do reach out to me or to Courtney, and we will support and assist you as best as we can. Before I go, Brennan, I see your hand is still up. Is this an old hand, a leg? Thank you so much. Are there any other questions? Okay, I see no questions. Let me quickly go to the chat box. Okay, I will put the slide onto Moodle. I've noted the message in the chat box. Okay, so again, I remind you to reach out to me, those who have submitted, if there is something in the lecture that has inspired or have made you think a little bit deeper in terms of what you've put together thus far. You're more than welcome to continue working on your report, and notify me if you would like to resubmit, and I will reopen the portal. To those who have not submitted as yet, please be reminded that the assignment 4 has only been extended to the 30th of August. So let us ensure that we have uploaded all of our work by then. Okay, if there's no questions, thank you everybody for being here. I'm going to now give over to the next lecture, which should have started at 10. I unfortunately went over time. I do apologize. Prof. Sipotso, if you are here.
Noted, my brother, no problem.